So here goes. This panel we've been talking this morning about how quickly the world is changing, the crises, the transformations. This panel is going to be devoted to talking about the global institutions which exist allegedly to cope with these crises and maybe aren't in a great position to do that. And I don't think that Victor could have assembled a better, more representative group of people to talk about global institutional architecture. We have a very distinguished European, Javier Solana, leader, really, and shaper and father of European institutions. We have my friend Strobe Talbott, as I said before, president of Brookings. I mostly like to think of him as a journalist. He's still a recovering journalist, I think, and also has done his time as a diplomat and shaper of American diplomacy and America's relationship with the world. Igor Yurgens, who is now the head of one of the most important and interesting Russian think tanks, a major Russian public intellectual. He's also worked in business, so understands that side of the fence. And then we have heard already from Shankar Aiyar, who is a member of parliament. All of our Indians, I think that Victor only invites Indian politicians who have been cabinet ministers at least 3 times. So he has been in 4 cabinet posts. So we have a European, American, Russian, and Asian perspective on world institutions. And without further ado, I'm going to ask Javier to comment on the world today and how our institutions, do we have the right institutions? And do we have the right microphone for Javier?
Is it working? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much to the organizer, Victor, and President Kuchman. It's a pleasure to see you again, to be back in this beautiful place. I think I haven't missed any of the conference, so I'm very happy to be here again. Now, the topic of this conversation, I will try to have a conversation, is how to shape the institution, how to shape the future. I will start to say that to me, the most important thing that has taken place this year up to today is the speed at which things have taken place. In 6 months, we have had such a lot of things happening that were unexpected, beginning in January with the Arab revolutions, going to the next month and having a dramatic situation in Japan, a lot of people suffering, but something happened afterwards, that it was the nuclear dossier has gone back years. And since we have a problem with CO2 on energy, and at the same time we have a backwards step in the nuclear problem, we have a big situation to handle. Then we have, for the first time in the economic, the United States downgraded the AAA, which is really something that we could not even believe or dream in any moment. Dream is a matter of saying things. But if I go to the economics, I think the G20 this year has shown, well, last year has shown the same, a tremendous weakness. If I were to say that the 2 main or 2 first G20s were constructive, positive, so positive that they stopped really the beginning of the first part of the crisis, but from there on, really, the G20 has not been present at all. I was very sad to see the G7 the other day meeting in Marseille, and if you read the document that had produced, in the moment it was produced, you think these people are crazy when they meet. What the hell they meet? Now, we are going to have another G20 in November in Marseille also, in Nice, organized by Sarkozy. Let's hope that we are able to obtain a G20 of the level of the first 2. So we get a common position to get out of the situation so dramatic that we are today. On the economy, the second thing that has been buried this year has been the WTO Doha round, which is really a very, very bad news. Because not to have, at this point in time, any possibility of moving on trade is very, very dramatic. Now, the third thing I would like to say that linked to the nuclear issue is the climate change. Really, we don't have any good news from the climate change institutionally or the climate change non-institutional. The only thing we have is bad news, really, from just about every quarter of the world. Now, the last thing I would like to say is that I think that one of the issues that we have to tackle in a conversation like this one is that the length of the political cycle. I think that we are living politically in a very short cycle. The cycle in which we live really is 2 years. The United States has a cycle basically of 2 years. By the middle of the first mandate of a president, we are already in the second period. Therefore, we have 2 years useful to do anything. I do think that we have to reflect and think, because it's incompatible to want to solve long-term problems, as the global institutions have to do, and have the member states of those institutions, or the majority or big numbers of those, with a political cycle that is so short. That is valid for the United States, it's valid to the Europeans. Chancellor Merkel has been not a 2-year cycle, has been a 6 month cycle, right? 6 months in elections, and is paralyzed because of the electoral process. So I think if we want to solve the problems collectively in global institutions, we may have to see how we can handle the political cycles in a different manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Javier. Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you very much, Javier. Strobe, do you want to just take over from there?
Well, I'll do the best I can to at least follow Javier's outstanding example that he set for us on concision and brevity, and I will also try to slip in behind him on some of the issues of substance. I think he's put the overall challenge before us very well, and all we have to do is, since we're all pretty sophisticated in these things, is just say the acronyms or the names of the institutions that we're talking about, and we also know what the problems are. And there's been reference earlier today to the United Nations, which is facing an experience this fall, which I think will probably underscore its lack of effectiveness more than its ability to affect one of the major issues of our time. I might add NATO to the list of international institutions, which has in some ways risen to a challenge, but not entirely, and faces some real crises down the road. I'd put the CIS on the list as well, and the list goes on and on. My own hope, looking to the future, is that we collectively will find a way of thinking and acting along 2 tracks. The first being to make the best, and indeed make better, out of the formal institutions that we have inherited, the new formal institutions that we have put in place, like the G20, and not give up on them. And at some point in the conversation, I hope that Javier in particular will speak to the question of the European Union and whether it is facing an existential and fatal crisis, or whether it is going to be able to pull through what it faces right now. But I'd like to just spend a minute or so on what I mean by informal second track. And it has 2 dimensions to it. One is to think, we're talking really here about global governance. I think that is the issue before us in this panel. And one way to think about global governance and to make progress in that area is not so much through existing institutions, but more what I call purpose-driven ad hoc arrangements and groupings. Figure out which countries bear the most responsibility, both in terms of fault for a problem and also ability to do something about the problem, and get something done within that group, GX, whatever it is, G3, G4, G5, G6, G7, which is always going to be controversial because it's going to be a number a lot smaller than 193. But nonetheless, if it can get things done, and picking up on what I think is the issue of all issues for the century, that Javier typically has given prominence to, and that's climate change. We cannot wait for a UN process to produce a universal binding treaty, although we have to keep seeking that. It's really going to be overwhelmingly up to the EU, which for all its shortcomings has made progress on cap and trade, certainly the United States, India, China, and some other countries. The other sense in which we can advance the cause of global governance goes back to the complement that Larry Summers played to you, Victor, at the beginning of the day. Now, he was talking about the United States and Tocqueville's famous compliment to the United States for American democracy deriving its strength and resilience from civil society. But there is now such a thing as global civil society, and this forum is part of it. And the more of this kind of thing that happens, and the more interaction, and there's an awful lot of overlap among the participants here at this conference and other ones that we can think of, the more that that movement, if I can call it that, can not only address problems, but come up with, represent a constituency for solutions both at the informal level and at the level of formal institutions, will be much better off. I suspect that the issue of global governance depends on effective national governance. And we have a very serious challenge, to put it very politely, to national governance in the United States of America right now. That's sort of an invitation to come back to that subject if the group so desires.
Another excellent example of succinctness and touching the key issues. So thank you very much, Strobe. Igor.
We as Russia, we do not lack institutional instruments to be in the world arena and to be in the international life. We are United Nations member, we are OSCE member, we're the leaders of the CIS, we're many things, but we cannot figure out who is the strategic ally yet. We are spoiled both by the mineral resource and the territory. We still can play between three of our major neighbors, United States, three superpowers on our border, United States, China, and European Union. And sometimes we play in this triangle, but less and less we have a potential to be a real player if we don't choose. My ideal scenario is for Russia as a prodigal son to return back to Europe, to the Judo-Christian family, to reinforce positions, then to negotiate with China, of course Europe being Euro-Atlantic security system, and then, of course, we can play our role. We can become a chosen people, together with the Jews, who are chosen because they are monotheist. We can be chosen people because we will then bridge two civilizations, European and Asian, Euro-Atlantic and Asian. And that will be our mission, because with 40% of the mineral resource of the world, and with the shortest cut between Asia and Europe, what else is the mission of the nation? And where else the nation can get maximum of its riches? I have many things to say that we're not idle. I have many things to say about the fact that it's a consensus between the two leaders who are now supposedly will announce soon who is going to run Russia for another 6 years in one case, and another 12 years, I'm afraid, in another case. But beside the point, those two people, in principle, are in agreement. Back to Europe, the price of this tag would be different. With United Europe, together with China and the United States, to build up something more interesting. But talking about what Strobe mentioned, civic society, we just finished this Yaroslav Forum, which is a dear darling of our President Medvedev, and Zbigniew Brzezinski, a good friend of ours, proposed that civic society has to build its own network from Vancouver to Vladivostok, because we rely less and less on governments. Here I should quote Shimon Peres. The governments are playing with its population in a demagoguery game because they cannot do something unpopular. And they're sometimes mesmerized with different ideas. But to take security on board, to take cooperation on board seriously, to think it over, that's only civic society and the people like you, Strobe, like Brzezinski, and some others who can get together with clever Russians, Chinese, and others, and to build up something serious. And I can tell you that with your colleagues from the Council on Foreign Policy, we tried to build up a first network of G20 brain trusts, brain institutions, which would be called Council of Councils. And please, I think that Mr. Pinchuk and Ukraine, with a forum like this, should be a very serious chain in this Vancouver, Vladivostok civic society forums to think over what we can do to help the governments or in spite of their goodwill.
Thank you very much. And finally, Manny.
Coming as I do from the third world, I'm always amazed by two things which I encounter increasingly in the Western world. One is the manner in which the West has gone from the triumphalism of 1991 to the despair of 2011. The other thing that I'm amazed at is the way they seem to think that India and China are any kind of rivals to Western power. The fact of the matter is that whatever the present economic difficulties of the West, between America and the European Union, they are an overwhelming presence in the world. In fact, the United States of America is the only country which has succeeded in legitimizing a physical and military presence all over the world, and particularly in Asia. In fact, quite as if it were a normal and natural thing, they say there are three powers in Asia. There's India, there's China, and there's America in Asia. There's no other country in the world which can even pretend to make such a claim on another continent and in another land and on another people. So let us not forget the dominant role of the United States, whatever its economic difficulties, on the world stage. Secondly, there's NATO, of which the European Union is an integral part. I had been taught as a geography student at school that Afghanistan is a landlocked country. I now find that it is a peripheral country to the Atlantic Ocean because the NATO is sitting over there. They have extended their ambit right across two oceans to be hugely present in Afghanistan and thereby totally destabilize the region in which India finds itself. That's on the one hand. I don't see any decline in American power, in Western power. I find that this is in fact on the increase, and there is an element of Western hegemony that is an overwhelming reality of today's world. The second thing that amazes me is the praise that is lavished on India and China as coming superpowers. As far as I can see, China is a poor dictatorship, and India is a desperately poor democracy. The overwhelming reality of my country is not the 200 million Indians who have somehow broken out of the poverty trap, but the 1 billion Indians who remain stuck at a daily income of below 50 US cents a day at the exchange rate and $2 a day at purchasing power parity. This is the overwhelming reality of India. We have about the highest maternal mortality rate anywhere in the world. We have just about the highest infant mortality rate anywhere in the world. We add more hungry millions to the world's population than the rest of the world put together. We have among the lowest rates of literacy and education. I think it is a gross illusion, and one which no Indian must share, of thinking that we are on the edge of becoming a superpower. And I think the same truth should dawn on the Chinese. I think every Chinese knows it, but I doubt that the Chinese leadership would wish to confess to it. The fact of the matter is that we live in an extremely unequal world, and when we hear the siren song, which I've been hearing on this stage, about India and China having somehow the potential to right all the wrongs of the world, I think we, at any rate, should not be listening to these siren songs. Otherwise, we'll smash against Charybdis, the European Union, or against Scylla, the United States of America. The other thing that I think we need to recognize is that I beg to disagree with President Shimon Peres. Everyone else has been praising him. But what I found amazing about his statement was that he suggested that we forget history. I don't think we should. I think we should recognize, we in Asia should recognize the story of Europe in the 19th and 20th centuries. and the kind of vicious rival nationalisms which characterized the European continent, and because the European continent owned much of the rest of the world. If I might digress for a moment, when Krishna Menon at Hyde Park once rhetorically said, was speaking about the evils of the British Empire, somebody from the audience screamed at him that the sun never sets, he said, on the British Empire, to which Menon retorted, that's because even God wouldn't trust the British in the dark. The fact of the matter is that because the rest of the world was owned by the European continent, the net result was that what was a civil war, an ethnic conflict inside this tiny little continent called Europe, became a worldwide war, not once, but twice over. Now, in these circumstances, the lesson for us, especially India and China, to draw is that meaningless great power rivalries must be avoided in the future. That we just mustn't get into a mode where we ask, what right has China to have a navy in the Indian Ocean? Or for the Chinese to say, what is the Indian Navy doing in the South China Seas? I think we need to work towards the Nehruvian vision of Hindi, Chini, Bhai, Bhai, of Indians and Chinese being brothers. Now, that may have been badly disturbed by the 1962 war, but as a strategic concept, I think it makes much greater sense for India and China to be friends rather than to be rivals, and then start looking to third powers to try to balance the imbalance in the balance of power between the two countries. Equally, I think, we should recognize that we in Asia are the most divided continent in the whole world. The Americans in 1962 set up the Organization of American States. The Europeans in 1957 had a Treaty of Rome between 6 countries. It's now gone on to 27. The Africans, who are undoubtedly the most intelligent human beings on earth, started with an Organization of African Unity and have ended with an African Union. The only continent to be divided by every conceivable wall is Asia. And yet it was the Asian Renaissance that was principally responsible for ending the era of colonialism. Now, if this Asian Renaissance is to be translated into an Asian resurgence, it is absolutely essential that the countries of Asia have a sense of belonging to each other. And I believe that an Asian oil and gas community, with Russia very much a part of it, recognizing that east of the Urals, all of North Asia is part of the Russian Federation. If we were to form an Asian oil and gas community in the way in which Europe began with a coal and gas community, I think we would be able to move towards a point where Asia then can pose the most fundamental question which the 21st century has to answer. And I say the 21st century because of the existence of nuclear weapons. Are we going to continue with the quest for dominance, which has characterized international relations since the dawn of history, but has had disastrous consequences in the 20th century? Or are we going to eschew the quest for dominance and say, I can't help the fact that I have a lot of Indians in my country, but that's no reason why I should seek living space in some other part of the world? Or that the Chinese start saying to themselves, the Middle Kingdom belongs to history. Now all of us are Middle Kingdoms because all of us are equal in our sovereignty. And if you're going to be equal in our sovereignty, then G7 and G3, G20 and G15 are really no ultimate answer. It has to be G193 because all 193 of us are equal in the one dimension of our sovereignty. And therefore, a lot has to be restored to the United Nations. Mr. Peresh said he didn't think the UN had much to offer, but it was the UN that created Israel. And therefore, I think we'll have to find a solution to what has happened as a result of the creation of Israel in the United Nations. And we can't continue having these tiny little clubs, these tiny little cliques to which we get invited. Oh yes, we are there at G8, but we are asked to sit in the ante-room until the meeting's over, and then we are called in to have dinner, and then we are flattered by being told, oh, your prime minister knows more economics than all prime ministers put together, and he makes a speech to them. I think actively we have to have the idealism to look towards one world, to think of all human beings as equal, to say Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which is an ancient 5,000-year-old Sanskrit expression which says all of creation, not just human beings, all of creation is my family. Leaves are my family, ants are my family, water is my family, people are my family. If we don't start looking at this world of ours as one world and this humankind of ours as one people, I'm afraid we'll find several reasons to quarrel and none to make up. We do need a completely new ethic, one that eschews the quest for dominance and places a premium on harmony and no domination of anyone over the other. And I hope we can begin this exercise in India by India extending a really generous hand to Pakistan and making up with Pakistan, understanding what it is that caused them and causes their worries, and try and sort things out so that a united South Asia can lead the world towards a united Asia and then a united world. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Manny. Victor organized this forum for a place where people could think big, and I think global governance and one single world political entity is kind of as big as it gets, right, Victor? Lots of food for thought. I have picked out 4 big themes that everybody hit on, and maybe we can talk about them for a bit together before throwing it open. One was Europe, whether Europe, is it working, how does it relate to the rest of the world? The second one that we came at from different perspectives is America. Is America working internally? Maybe America is still dominant. The third one is, what are the institutions? Should they be sort of issue by issue, as Strobe was suggesting? Does it have to be the G193? And then the fourth, I thought very interesting how many people touched on this question of global civil society. Is there such a thing? What should its role be? So Europe does seem to be in the hot seat right now, source of more problems for other parts of the world than anywhere else. Javier, you're the bad boys right now. How are you doing?
Is that okay? Yeah. Can I say a couple of things before I enter into Europe? I'd like to say one thing to Moni, in the sense that I think the United Nations is the number one, is the chapeau of everybody. But I think we have to look at the United Nations as the place from where the legitimacy comes, not necessarily where all the responses do come, but the legitimacy comes from the United Nations. And I think we have had in this first semester of the year a very important example of that, which is Libya. Libya has been used, it has been under a lot of effort, a UN Security Council resolution using for the first time responsibility to protect. That, remember, was a concept that entered into the reform of Kofi Annan and never has been, it's the first time that is placed in the UN Security Council resolution. I think it's very important, United Nations legitimacy. Now, the second thing I would like to say very briefly, I agree with everybody who has said civil society. I think the global civil society is the way. Now, I enter into Europe. I love Europe. I love the European Union also. And therefore, I can talk and be critical without any doubt. I think we have at the European Union a very serious economical problem. Very serious. And today, the Minister of Finances have a meeting in Poland with the Secretary of State, Secretary of Economy from the United States. The first time that happens. The first time that happens. And I hope very much that debate will produce something better. But I do think, honestly, that the European Union is going to survive this crisis, and we survived crisis in '93 and any other moment. The European Union has a problem that grows and moves forward through crisis. In a way, we are calling for crisis in order to move on, which is a bad manner of growing, really. But that is the case. Now, the third thing I would like to say that politically, one tends to think, or people tend to think, that the European Union politically has diminished their presence in the world. But think for a moment. Everybody has diminished their importance in the world. We have heard this semester talking to the president, listening to the president of the United States, saying we lead from the back. I don't know what it means, but really it's not leading. From the back, it doesn't lead. You lead from the front. Therefore, it's another manner to say, I am not leading. So everybody's downplaying their political activity in the world today. But at the end, the European Union have acted very promptly and very well, to my mind, in parts of the questions and problems that we have in the Arab world today. So I don't want to fall into the pessimism in the European Union, at the European Union, recognizing that really we are in one of the deepest crises that we have been since the beginning, since 1950. Now, the other thing I would like to say, which is related to Europe, is NATO. Igor, you said that you would like to have Russia, European Union, I think you mean Russia and the United States, therefore Russia, European Union, and NATO, in a way, which is the first time that I listened to that clearly stated, and then let's talk to the Chinese. That is quite a statement that you have produced, and I'm very happy to hear that.
Okay, Strobe, and in particular, I would really be interested, in addition to whatever is on your mind, to hear your comment on whether America is weak or America is strong. You know,
doesn't happen very often, but I do want to just make a friendly amendment, which is to say a correction to something that my buddy Javier just said, or at least put it into context. This phrase, lead from behind, has become a kind of toxic icon of the American debate right now. To the best of anybody's knowledge, Barack Hussein Obama never said it. It was a blind quote, 3 paragraphs from the end of a Ryan Lizza takeout on American foreign policy in the New Yorker. But it obviously struck a chord big time, and the administration is so obsessed with it that they even have reduced it to initials. LFB. Everybody knows what that means, which is what we want not to be associated with. But actually, to take it seriously for a second, and not quite so prejudicially, it's a perfectly dreadful way of expressing something that you have advocated for, and many of us have advocated for, which is a combination of burden sharing and having the European Union, as you said, step up to the plate on things like Libya. And it was specifically in the context of Libya. And while that operation has lasted a lot longer than many of us had hoped, if Gaddafi were a stock, he would be doing a lot worse than even those on the New York Stock Exchange at the moment, as a result of that policy having generally worked. What's going on in the United States? Larry, I think, laid it out pretty darn clearly, and it's the economy, stupid. And when America has a stupid economy, if I can put it that way, it has terrific and very damaging political implications, not just for the administration in office, but for the entire governance structure of the United States. President Obama's approval ratings are well below 50%. They're not that different, though, from where Bill Clinton's were and George W. Bush's were at a comparable point in their own presidency, and they went on to win re-election. The United States Congress is at 13%, if I'm correct, in the last Gallup poll, which is to say there is a general crisis of confidence and trust in our governing authorities in the United States, and that is greatly exacerbated by a degree of political polarization worse than anything we have seen in modern times. And that's empirically a defensible proposition. The most conservative Democrat in the United States Senate has no overlap in this case, his voting record with the most liberal Republican in the United States Senate. Whereas for decades and decades, there's been a considerable overlap. There has been a centrist base, and we have lost that. Moreover, and this takes the issue global, I would suggest that in a lot of countries, including ones represented here, there is a crisis of trust and confidence in what you could call democratic capitalism, capitalist democracy in a lot of parts of the world. Martin Indyk and I just came from your country, and we've seen out on the streets there's been a lot of transformation of triumphalism to gloom in India and the Anna Hazare movement and so forth and so on. This is a universal problem. I would end on a more positive note, which is that it is happening in the context, and Javier alluded to this earlier, of a period of history which is unique in human history, where all of the major powers in the world are at least at peace with each other, and moreover, not only are they not at war with each other, it's more than that, they are also groping towards ways of collaborating more than they ever have in the past.
Okay, Igor, and I would be particularly interested if you could pick up really where Strobe left off with this notion that all of the major powers are not only at peace, but not only not at war, but trying to do things together. And also, I really would be interested in your view about how does America, not only so much internally, but as a player on the world stage, how does it look to you from Moscow? Is it remarkably dominant, as Manny suggested? Is it pretty weak, as I think you could conclude from Strobe's comments?
No, everybody in his senses or her senses in Russia do understand that the United States of America produces 25% of world GDP. United States of America consumes 60% of energy, and so on and so forth. It's a very serious nation, and it's in a way the way our reset with United States took place. Medvedev, our President Medvedev and Obama are friends, and they talk to each other more often than ever in history. When Obama came to power, people around him, including Secretary of State, said that, well, Russia is number 25 on our radars. But after that, 26 or 27 personal conversations on many, many issues. So for us, the United States is a strategic ally for the people who know. For the people out on the street, it's still an imperialist enemy. But it's the question of PR, not the question of substance of our relationship. So having said that, in terms of bilateral trade, it's lower than China, and it has no comparison with the European Union. Our 50% of GDP, of our trade turnover is, of course, with the European Union. So the United States is a very important player. We wish the United States well. We do not understand how deeply they put themselves in this confrontation between Republicans and Democrats, and we are not very happy, at least progressive side of Russian intelligence, we're not very happy with the way they treat their President Obama at the moment. He really looks like a lame duck. In some mysterious way, I think the fate of those two presidents, Obama and Medvedev, somehow is linked. I don't know, I cannot prove, there are no facts, but it is linked emotionally. So from this point of view, the United States is a very important player, but again, I told you, hard facts and figures show that European Union is number one. And here I can tell you that, again, in spite of all the difficulties which we have internally, and some of us are not very happy, or to say, not very unhappy with what's happening domestically and politically, but there is a consensus that we should integrate with them. For the first time in the history of Russia, Soviet Union, of course, we have a first vice prime minister in charge of integration. The customs union mentioned here, actually, was designed to reinforce our position to integrate with Europe. We are past the 16th round of negotiation of the so-called cooperation and partnership agreement with the EU. In principle, we have a plan to have common economic space with Europe in 5 years from now, and then to drag Belarus and Kazakhstan into the same space. And then we will be living in the same economic Europe, but then we'll have to figure out what politics will be. And that's very difficult part of this equation. At the moment, I think that we will be advising anybody, any president of Russia in March 2012, to swap our energy resource for WTO entry, OECD entry, and visa-free Europe. Visa-free Russia-Europe relations. And then in this case, it will be irrevocable. The ties between younger generation, which has nothing to do with the Cold War and everything else, will put us together, and that will solve a lot of Ukrainian problems too.
Okay, well, sounds as if, Igor, you share Mani's vision of, even at a time when global institutions seem to be
I
in
can tell
crisis, you share his
nobody-
vision of them incorporating more and more members.
One little technical detail, even my Indian friend doesn't know probably that the format which is called, not BRICS, but pre-BRICS format, which is called Russia, India, Brazil, works. And today in Moscow, for example, the ministers of foreign affairs in this format meet. I mean China, India, Brazil, excuse me. That invented by Primakov and still works. We consult each other. We do share the idea that United Asian energy pool can contribute to the togetherness of mankind. Ideologically, I'm very much with you.
Okay, togetherness of mankind, hard to object. Manny, I would especially like you to comment on a point that Strobe raised, which is this notion that there is a wider than in the US lack of confidence in whether democratic capitalism can work. And that was very much what Strobe was picking up when he was in India. Do you agree with that?
You see, there is no such place as India. There is an India of Bangalore where 6 to 10 million Indians are living on the geographical fact that when Californians sleep, Indians remain awake, and when Indians sleep, Californians remain awake. So it makes us a superb country for outsourcing business opportunities. It also, you don't need more than 5 or 6 million out of 1.2 billion Indians to be computer literate and therefore to be able to assist in the ITES industry of America. The result of this is that 57% of the Indian economy now derives from services, of which about 40% derives from the IT sector alone. And in the manufacturing sector, as a result of economic reforms, we have 15% growth every year of manufacturing, but the number or the share of workers in the organized sector is the same today at 8% as it was then, because all manufacturing is being driven by additional capital investment in technology, not the employment of additional people. In the meanwhile, the share of India's population in agriculture at 65% remains exactly as it was 20 years ago. But the share of agriculture in GDP is only 14.6%. I think we are building up a disaster for ourselves in which our democracy could be undermined and our development disrupted. The only way of moving forward is through equity. We cannot continue with a situation in which India prospers, but Indians don't. And in these circumstances, I think we should beware of being told that we are a growing superpower, because then India starts pursuing prosperity instead of alleviating poverty. I think our priorities domestically are being seriously affected by our being described as an emerging superpower. Also, this is tempting us into joining other people's alliances. Now, I know the answer given by my government to our strategic partnership with the United States is that, oh, it's only one of 40 strategic alliances. But we know that the strategic alliance with the US is very special. And we also know, and you only have to read Robert Kaplan's book, Monsoon, to see how insidiously we are being drawn into the kind of alliances, don't worry about China because we Americans are there to help you. Or somebody else saying that so long as China behaves, then that long India needn't bother about coming into a closer defense relationship. I think we ought to be dictating what should happen in the future in terms of a far stronger commitment to the pursuit of friendship than to the pursuit of rivalry. And this means that several of the more undesirable aspects of competition between countries needs to be moderated in favor of cooperation among countries. But the world situation is, I think, beautifully illustrated in that mural, which I couldn't see when I was sitting in the audience, but which I've got a panoramic view of now. You have the United States of America as the big tiger, completely dominating the world, but looking totally bewildered. It doesn't know what to do. On the far edge is little China, which is jumping onto the world, pretending that it is as big as the major king. You have India in the corner there, as usual, not knowing which way it should go, and therefore not quite jumping onto the world. And you got Europe sleeping there at the bottom because it cannot make up its mind whether whether the Cold War is over or not. If the Cold War is over, then why do you have NATO? And why is NATO directed against the former Soviet Union and the present Russia? Why cannot Russia be included in whatever defense arrangements you're making? But you're still treating Russia as the enemy. And because the Ukraine sits in between, it's being pressed from both sides. The European Union on the left is pushing them, and the Russian Federation on the right is pulling them. I think one of the most unfortunate countries in the world is the Ukraine, simply because of its geographic location. It's been overrun all the time constantly, and instead of saying that you are not the battlefield of Europe, that you are part of us, the Europeans are thinking up various reasons why the Ukraine should not be part of the European Union. If you believe that Greece, of all countries, can be part of the European Union, I see no reason at all why tomorrow you cannot sign an agreement to take the European Union in. And the minute you take Ukraine in, the Russian Federation will become an obvious partner. And please remember that there is only one continent called Eurasia, which has a southern peninsula called South Asia and a western peninsula called Europe. And the geographical space of the South Asian peninsula is exactly the same as the geographic space of this western peninsula. It's only that imperialist Mercator who drew the map of the world in such a way that we look like a small country. But actually the distance from Srinagar in the north to Tamil Nadu is the same as from Moscow to Lisbon. And from Gujarat in the west to Mizoram in the east, the distance is the same as from the North Cape in Norway to the island of Crete in Greece. And we regard ourselves as a mother India whose right arm has been lopped off into Pakistan and whose left arm has been lopped off into Bangladesh. We regard ourselves as one nation, although we speak 28 languages and 3,000 dialects, and we have every religion under the sun. We have more Muslims in India than they have in Pakistan. We have the oldest Christian church was established in India. The Syrian Christian church has the right to regard the Pope as a Protestant because he came to office 8 centuries after the Syrian Christian church was established in India. Now, if we can be one nation, why can't Europe be one nation? Stop your internecine wars. You first fought on religion, massacred each other. Then you had the Treaty of Westphalia and you started fighting on the basis of nations, massacred each other. Then you started fighting on race and massacred each other. Then you started fighting after the meeting in this room on the Cold War and almost massacred not only each other but all the rest of us. I think we should go back to the question that Mahatma Gandhi was asked. He was asked, Mahatma, what do you think of Western civilization? And the Mahatma paused for a moment, reflected, and said, I think it would be a good idea. So I think it's time. I really think we need a different ethic.
That's such a good line. I can't really add to that, so I'm going to say questions, please. We have time only for maybe 5 to 10 minutes. We don't want Igor to miss his flight. So, please, some questions? Come on, I know that these were eloquent panelists, but surely that inspires questions rather than deadening the audience. Going once? Going twice? I have one more that I want to ask, so. No one? 3 times? Okay, I will ask my question. I thought I wasn't going to get in. So, and this is really to everyone. So you guys talked, everyone in some way talked about global civil society and quite excitedly about the role that this could play. But my question is, Is that a true civil society that you're talking about, or is this global layer that you're talking about of the think tanks and so on really part of this other dynamic we're seeing in the world, which is an increasing rift between what's happening in the global elite and what's happening inside nations among the people who aren't really part of this successful, turbocharged, globalized world? I heard a little bit of that in Manny's remarks. I think maybe Strobe, this phenomenon is a little bit evident in the polarization of America to which you alluded. So that's my question to you guys. Are we really, when we're talking about this globalized civil society, are we kidding ourselves? And is it really a globalization of the elites, but big parts of the world not partaking of that conversation? Igor wants to go first.
Can I start not to lose my flight? My idea was absolutely practical. I worked with Semnan Ishinger from Security Council and our Igor Ivanov on the Euro-Atlantic Strategic Initiative. And one of the chapters of this is so-called frozen conflicts. Nagorno-Karabakh, Transnistria, by the way, Northern Cyprus and stuff like that. And Adam Rothfield sitting here is a dear colleague in this group. And we found out through this analysis that no matter what states, governments, militias, armies decide, if civic society is not intertwined in solving the problem would arise again. Turkey with Armenia almost mended at the level of the governments. Nothing happens again. Nagorno-Karabakh is still a very difficult and very explosive region. So through this analysis, it took us some time, it took us some sessions, so I do not have time to describe it all. Long story short, if real civic society, from youth organizations to writers' organizations to think tanks, if they're not involved in trying to solve the conflicts by exchanging with each other, culture to culture, people to people, Indians to Pakistanis, Indians to Chinese, etc., the conflict will arise again no matter what. So from this point of view, the world governance and the solution of most of the problems is with the civil society, not with the governments. So our initiative, correct me if I'm wrong, Adam, is to ask OSCE in the frozen conflicts of Europe to take on board the real representative of the civic society and start exchanges and slightly forget sort of the governments for the time being, apart from the flaring things like eventual conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Okay, and officially, Igor, if you need to go to catch your flight, we will forgive you, yeah? Okay. Strobe, you want?
Quickly, Christia, I think the premise of your question, and it was a leading question in the best sense, is correct. And it poses a challenge to all of the NGOs represented in this room, some of us more than others. I think, for example, the Pinchuk Foundation pays a lot of attention to what's going on in Ukraine and what's happening to Ukrainian society. Because the NGO world has evolved over 100 years in the United States, there's a tendency for us as a community to look out to the world, America's role in the world, and not pay enough attention to what's going on in the United States and to make that connection. And I think it behooves all of us to do a better job of that. And it isn't just, because it isn't just political polarization or ideological or party polarization. It's also a sense of a lot of people that they don't have buy-in to the big decisions that are basically made on foreign policy grounds but have huge domestic consequences.
Okay, yeah, Javier, please. And then... Yeah, please.
I'd like to say a couple of things about the global civil society. I think this is a beautiful objective, but if we do want, as Igor said at the last minute when he said, well, the OECE should try to organize the civil society and the OECE space, it's something cannot be top-down. It has to be bottom-up by definition. If not, we don't have anything that can be called civil society. And I think that we have the best opportunity in history to have the beginning of that, the embryo of that. That means that we have to communicate I am still very surprised with the fundamental importance that Al Jazeera has had in so many issues that are taking place this semester, or this long semester. And anybody who wants to follow now what is going on in other parts of the world, you can do it in a manner that never before you could do it. That is a fundamental change. So I'd like to say that if we have an opportunity, this is the one. Opportunity to move in that direction of constructing a global society. The number of NGOs are many. And let me tell you also it's also something we haven't touched about on global institutions, on global problems, with the problems of development. And on development, a lot has been done. A lot has been done from the civil society. And I would like to call attention to the meeting that will take place in South Korea in the month of December, in which the objectives of millennium are going to be tackled in a very much constructive manner. It will be, I hope, a success. So on that, also, we have moved in the right direction, as Strobe say, in a objective-driven schemes of working, which I think is the manner in which we should be looking at the global scheme of the world of today.
Okay, thank you. And I think we have a final question from Sasha, yeah? Thank you, Strobe.
I may a question to Javier Solana, because if you would have a German politician here at this podium, he would definitely, whether it would be Joschka Fischer or Schröder or Kohl or someone else, speak about the United States of Europe. For many Germans, this is the way forward, out of the crisis. Run towards the United States of Europe, forget about the Lisbon Charter, do something more, unite Europe in a more political way. My question to you, do you think this is the real way out of the crisis, and how long will it take, theoretically, to establish this kind of United States of Europe?
Okay, also bearing in mind Manny's point that India has done it already, so...
Nothing takes place in the European Union at the speed of light, okay? Do you agree on that? Nothing takes place in the European Union at the speed of light, okay? Having said that, I think that this is the way in which to move on. Not everybody will agree on it, but I think the only outcome to this situation is more Europe, not less.
Do you have a Europe point, Strobe? Okay, I'm just going to give each of you a chance, a final blitz round. You can make a final comment on anything you like. I'm going to go opposite direction. Manny?
I think...
Just talk.
Okay. I think both my colleagues Suresh Prabhu and I were somewhat startled when we received this invitation to attend the Yalta European Strategy meeting, because neither of us are Europeans nor have any pretensions of being that. And at Yalta 1945, we were represented by Sir Winston Churchill. We were not allowed to be present ourselves. And yet, I find from the welcome that has been extended to us here, it's so warm, it's such an easy meeting of minds between people who've never really seen each other, that I would say that the YES 8th annual meeting has proved that what Strobe Talbott was saying is absolutely accurate, that people have to get together in order to bang the heads of governments together and come to good sense. I myself have had the opportunity of serving in Pakistan for 3 years as a diplomat, and in the last 30 years, I've been visiting Pakistan about 30 times. And I'm always amazed at how much friendship subsists between the Pakistani in the street and the Indian in the street. And yet, if you were to listen to the representatives of India and Pakistan in New York, you wouldn't believe that we don't hate each other. And therefore, the way forward is through meeting. We have a few Chinese students now in Indian universities, and I was fascinated when I was present when a Chinese student at the Nehru University was asked, what is the difference in student life between China and India? And his astonishing response was, why is it that Indian students are not out on the streets like Chinese students are? So I think the great hope for China lies in its younger generation. I think the great hope for India lies in its younger generation. And if only the coming generation shows itself to be more intelligent than we of the older generation have been, then possibly through this global society interaction, we will be able to move to the sunlit up plans of the 21st century. Thank you. Thank you all very much.
In the same spirit, there's no such, I don't want to get into a theological debate with anybody. There's no such thing as predestination, but there is such a thing as progress. And there has been one hell of a lot of progress since those three guys sat at that round table in the other room there. The century, we're lucky enough to have lived to see that our children and those of us who have grandchildren, there are a couple of us in the room who are, say, less than 5 years old or something like that, may see the next century. The century that we are in now has a good chance of being the best ever, and it has a good chance of being the worst ever. And when our kids grow up, the die may already be cast in terms of what course we're going to take, and we just have to do everything we can, including through ventures of this kind that you've made possible, Victor, to increase the chances that we'll get the right answer on that.
Okay, this is an uplifting kumbaya moment, I see. Javier, are you going to keep us happy? He's European, he has to be, but come on, Javier, let's see.
Very shortly. I think we love so much the future, we have committed so much to the future, the people here, that we are allowed to criticize the present, because we are really determined to change it. Max Weber used to say that the task of a good politician would be to civilize the future and to make it present. That's what we want to do, help to civilize the future and make it present. And that, I think we all coincide about that. And let's try to next year to do it a little bit better than this year, and see if we can get out of this dramatic crisis. And for that, I would like to say very loudly, very strongly, that the meeting of the G20 in November should be a great success of coordination of the exit. That means a good balance between growth and balanced budgets. And this is the difficult thing which we are living, and we don't know how to get out of that. But if we were able to get out of that in the next G20, it would be really a fantastic situation. Thank you.
Okay, on that, I think we will conclude. Thank you very much, gentlemen. That was really terrific and even uplifting almost to the end. Javier depressed us a little, reminded us of Europe. We have only a 15-minute coffee break before the next session.